For me, most landscape photography outings tend to start with good coffee, but good coffee is often the thing that's hardest to find when out in remote areas. So I was really happy to stumble across this really lovely roastery in the village of Nantler in North Wales. It was much needed after a pretty sleepless night in the van due to some pretty awful weather, but I'm caffeinated and ready to take on the day.
So good morning everybody, welcome back to another day here in Aruri National Park. At the end of last week's video I was a little bit sceptical about the weather for the remaining few days, and we woke up this morning and it was torrential rain, it was windy all night, so we've had a bit of a slow start. Haven't really decided exactly what the plan is for today, but we've decided to come down to Aberglaslyn, which is the lovely gorge that runs along Aberglaslyn up to the little town of Bethgelert. Beautiful gorge, lovely cascades, loads of ancient oak and ancient woodlands surrounding it, so somewhere that I've always kind of wanted to come. And I just thought it would make for a good topic that I've wanted to talk about for a while, which is all around photographing moving water and the very different approaches that you can take and the different impact and effect that that will have on the resulting image. So we're going to talk about that today, but more importantly, let's just have a nice walk in another beautiful part of North Wales. So I've just stopped and kindly borrowed Alex's binoculars because we've only literally come up the path, and using an app that I'll put on screen that Alex has got, there's been so many birds that we've heard in literally the space of 50 metres, and Alex has spotted a nuthatch up on this tree, which is just a really lovely thing to see. So if you don't know what a nuthatch is, I will put a picture up on screen. But yeah, they're beautiful little birds, and these are just the little things that you can pick up on. Even though it's all about photography for a lot of people, for me it's just about being out in nature as well and understanding what it is you might be potentially photographing.
So we'll get to the cascades and the topic of photographing moving water in just a minute, but before that I thought I'd take a quick second to properly introduce you guys to Alex. Alex is my partner. She has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to wildlife and nature, and if I've ever told you the name of a bird or a plant or a tree in any of my videos, the chances are it will have been Alex who will have told me all about that, and I think it's important to pass that knowledge forward. She is so valuable on these little adventures because she really teaches me about the things that I'm photographing in the landscape, and I think that's something that's important, and it's something that I wanted to share, is that developing an understanding of your surroundings just helps you have a much more immersed experience when in the landscape. So hopefully I'll be featuring Alex in a few more videos. I will be sharing all of her knowledge with you, and she is hoping to start a YouTube channel as well. So if anybody wants to learn more about wildlife and ecology, about conservation, anything to do with nature, then I will make sure to link Alex's channel in future videos once that's up and running. Anyway, let's get on to today's topic.
So this is a really beautiful location. I imagine this would be amazing in autumn with some really nice foliage on these trees. But let's get back to the whole point of today's video, which is my idea about how best to photograph moving water and the different applications when it comes to shutter speed. So we as landscape photographers have sort of two options to our arsenal. We can either photograph water with a slow shutter speed and do a long exposure, which creates that really kind of like milky effect in the water, or we can shoot with a fast shutter speed and really freeze the motion. And I think both are absolutely valid, but you'll see some photographers favoring one or the other. Some people hate long exposures, other people don't like the frozen aspect of water, but I think it really depends on the scene and the situation. So let me talk you through my mindset of how I decide my shutter speed. So firstly, let's talk about how we can compose a scene like this. So there's the river and the cascades, that's one element. But there's also really amazing rock formations that you often typically find along rivers or along the coast. There's often great opportunities for foreground. And I find when you're trying to find a good foreground element, I've found around this area where I'm focusing on the interesting textures and the shapes that these rocks create. And yes, the water is in the frame because we are along the river and it's an important subject. But really the focus of the image is more about the foreground than it is the water. And I find a long exposure really making that water feel very silky. That, in my mind, creates a less distracting element, which means that the focus and the eye can be drawn to the foreground and not be distracted by the sort of frozen aspect of the very sharp and contrasty nature of, I guess, water shot with a high shutter speed. So that's one application. I think if you are looking to have water in your scene but the main focal point isn't the water, then a long exposure can be really helpful. But then there's the flip side of the coin. If you really want to photograph water and you want the moving water to be the main subject, then you have to think about how best to accentuate that. Where you have cascades like this, a very long exposure or a very slow shutter speed will create a very whimsical, a very sort of ethereal, and it's kind of like fantasy, isn't it? It's like, it's not how our eyes see it, but it creates a very calming effect. But when I look at something like this, although that is a perfectly, good use of long exposure, certainly get great results that way. But really, these cascades are flowing so heavily. There's that torrent of water, there's the sort of froth and the bubbles that are being created by the cascades, and I think freezing that motion actually tells a good story of the velocity and the ferociousness of water. Having this all milky and smooth doesn't really fully represent the turbulence created in a location like this. This is often something you'll see in seascapes. Rachel Talabar, an amazing seascape photographer, when she photographs waves, quite often they are frozen in motion. It's a very high, fast shutter speed because it's creating that sense of the brutality, it's capturing the form, and it's freezing all of that motion. And I think that creates a really great effect. And a long exposure would have the complete opposite effect, or it wouldn't really work at all in that situation. So it depends what you're trying to capture. If you're trying to create a calm, sort of, I guess, whimsical scene, slow shutter speeds are great. But if you want to capture the real turbulence and the velocity of water, then I think a fast shutter speed will do a better job at sort of, I guess, painting the picture. So, just some things there to have a think about. So let me know in the comments below, do you prefer fast shutter speeds or slow shutter speeds for moving water? Do you like that milky effect, or are you more of a fan of freezing water? Or do you adopt the approach that I do, where it really kind of depends on the subject? I think it's an interesting debate because it's one that has a lot of opinions, I feel, in landscape photography. So we are nearly back at the van after a lovely walk up the Aberglaslyn Gorge. Yeah, photos were a mixed bag, but conditions aren't really optimal today for photography, but definitely a place that I'm looking forward to coming back to. Sorry, this path is quite sketchy. But yeah, there will hopefully be some more videos coming from this week's adventures here in North Wales. So if you've enjoyed this one, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss the next one, which will be out next week. Yeah, so until then, go out with your camera and maybe practice some moving water photography. All right, take care guys, see you all soon.